Hey everyone, Nicole and Alyssa here with Blondes Breaking Down Real Estate. We wanted to take the next few episodes in a different direction and away from all the coronavirus talk. So over the next few weeks, we're going to be directing our attention to the 7 buyer contingencies everybody should know about before they go and buy a home. Those contingencies include title contingency, inspection contingency, disclosures, HOA, appraisal, loan contingency, and the sale of another property. We're going to be covering everything you need to know about each contingency, from what documents you'll receive to when to walk away, and much, much more. So Alyssa, why don't you go over what we're going to be covering today?
Yeah, so today we have Ryan Lipsey and Haley Collier with Ticor Title, our favorite title people. And they're gonna walk us through all of the title contingencies. So basically, when you go into escrow, you're gonna have a prelim and you need to look through it and make sure that you're okay with everything that comes with the title of that property. And Ryan and Haley are gonna explain all of that for us. So without further ado, welcome Ryan and Haley.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, ladies. Thanks for having us. And yeah, I'm Ryan Lipsey of the Ryan Lipsey Team, and Haley is my onboard title expert. She actually sat on the title desk. How many years, Haley?
About 4 before I started working with you. So.
And she's over 2 years in sales now, so she's really kicking butt. I've been doing it since 2001, so I know I've seen most of the regular title issues that we see and everything under the sun, but Haley has a really rad story. I don't know if we're ready for that yet, or did you want
we're ready.
Well, yeah, so I mean, kind of just to start off, like, you know, basics of title and how these like stories kind of come up. So like what title insurance is, on the basics of it, is it's insuring your guys' buyers free and clear of any judgments or liens from the sellers coming into the property. So you can assure them that as a new buyer, there's going to be nothing hanging on from the previous seller, meaning any tax liens, child support liens, any kind of mortgages, HOA liens, anything that would be holding over the sale for the seller, that is gone, and you're insuring your new buyer of that. So that's kind of what the basis of title insurance is. So when we run these reports, we run names and we run the property. So sometimes you come up with, you know, if it's a common name, you get all sorts of different liens on there. You get all different kind of nasty judgments, and you're just kind of wondering as a seller or a buyer and as the agent what these are. So we have to get a statement of information to remove those liens. And one kind of crazy story that I had was we sent out a title report and there was these child support liens on there, but the child support liens went back to 1989. And as you guys know, with child support, those judgments don't go away unless there is something filed, a lien to release that lien of the child support judgment going away. So this was 2017, so quite a long time with this child support lien being on there. And we received a call from the seller, and lucky me, I get to answer the call, and he is screaming at me, saying some very rude things, saying, how in the hell am I like able to get this kind of information? He doesn't even have a child. So the story is he was selling his property. He was selling his home that he had lived in to move into a home with his new wife that he had just married. He says he denies having a child. He was never he has no idea what this is talking about. So I said, you know, sir, this is why we require the statement of information. Let me take a look at it and let me see, you know, if we can clear this off the report. Sure enough, it comes back. The driver's license is a match on there. The social security number is a match on there. And there was even a previous address on there that he had listed. So I had to make the uncomfortable phone call to escrow and the seller stating, hey, you know, this came back as a clear hit on you. If this is not you, then you have to call the child support services. You have to run this by them. There was clearly a mistake. He is like, this is ridiculous. This is from 1989. It was for like $12,000.
Yeah,
so it was a big.
That was a Haley Lori Povich moment. Like, you are the father.
Yeah. So it was like
$12,000 is not going to support a child, though. Let's be honest.
No. So this lien had been obviously accumulated from before 1989. So probably the child, you know, was maybe 10, 12. Who knows? That's not our business to know.
All the penalties, and that was probably just face value.
Yeah, and so sure enough, though, we get a demand from escrow. He had been paying it, so he did know that he had a child. So he had been paying the demand, he had been paying the child support, but this one, there was no release of lien that was issued. So just by happen chance, they had came up in the transaction, and sure enough, I didn't hear anything back from him after we got the demand.
That guy's going from child support court to divorce court.
Divorce court real quick. So, but we did close on the transaction, but that was a crazy story that happened. And so as you guys as agents, it's important to, really make sure that your sellers and buyers are aware of what kind of things can come up without a statement of information filled out. And that sometimes those things are common if they have a common name. We just need that paperwork to be able to clear those liens off the report. So yeah, that's kind of one of my crazy stories.
Yeah, that's a scary one. So just kind of so that we kind of stay on topic with the buyers, what specifically from a buyer's perspective are they looking at during their contingency period in regards to title?
I actually had a conversation last night with an incoming buyer. It was a Reef Point buyer, and they unfortunately weren't able to have title with us, but of course I'm happy to walk them through the process. And she had a ton of questions, like, buying a home is an emotional process. You sign so many forms, you don't know what the heck you're signing anymore. And she's like, just break it down to me. So what it is like, look, Ticor, or the title company, is putting their head on the chopping block and saying, Mr. Buyer, you have a clean bill of health on this title, right? And should something survive title, like an HOA lien or some kind of a state or federal tax lien, something comes up, now it's the title company that is the one that's going to pay in the form of a claim on that. So the buyer is free from anything that should survive the closure process. So they should definitely pay attention to, like, we have a lot of questions about property lines. We have a lot of questions about, and one of the questions that this woman had last night is, well, what about this second trust deed? What about this home equity line of credit? Is that going to be ours? And I'm like, no, you're not going to inherit any of that. So to be clear, the only debt, the only encumbrances, the only liens that are going to be on your property when you are a buyer of a property are going to be yours. So if you have a mortgage to buy your house, that's going to be on there, and so on and so forth.
So Ryan, let me catch you here. What is a lien? Can you explain what it is, how it comes about?
Haley, go ahead.
Haley.
So a lien is just something for like a deed of trust lien. That is, if you get a mortgage on your property, that is the lender putting a lien on your home stating that you will pay them off prior to selling your home. So that's on there. There's mechanics liens that can come on properties. That's if you had work done on your home and you didn't pay the contractor, the general contractor, they can issue a lien on your property, and those are something that have to be. Yeah. So that's kind of how a lien gets brought up. It's when you go to your home.
Whoa.
It's an issue. Sorry, that was an incoming call. It's an issuing of payment. So that's what a lien is on your property. So it's something that goes on your property. So when you go to sell your home, it's something that has to be paid.
Gotcha. Thank you for that explanation.
Yeah, of course. Another one, easements. Like, we've had cases where people put a shed or a flower bed or some kind of a feature on a property, but they go over their neighbor's property line. So yeah, that's I think the worst one I heard was at the Del Mar Meadows. You know how there's still some vacant lots out there, and somebody had put this gnarly retaining wall. It was like $55,000 to remove it because they had to get it within their property line. It was a nightmare. So it stalled the deal, everything. But that buyer needs to have full access all the way to their property line. So it makes sense. But before you build a retaining wall or a flower bed or a shed or any casita, definitely know where your property lines are.
And I think it's important too for your guys as buyers to know that when you first get issued the title report, it's called a preliminary title report. So it will state on there the taxes that will show if the seller has any unpaid taxes. It will show the CC&Rs, that covenants and restrictions that stay on the property, covenants, conditions, and restrictions. So those do remain on the property. will show easements that will remain on the property, that will stay. And then it will go into the seller's information of their deed of trust and what kind of liens they have. So when the transaction is done, your new buyers will be issued a final title policy that will have all the seller's liens removed, and it will show their new mortgage on their side, and it will show all the CC&Rs, the easements that remain with their property, and then it will also have their new mortgage information. So that's the difference between the preliminary title report when it's first issued during the transaction, and then your buyers at the end of the transaction in the mail receive their final title policy, which is clear of any of the seller's liens.
So is it the title company's responsibility to make sure that all the seller's liens are paid through escrow, or is that the buyer's responsibility?
It's
title companies, and we work with the escrow officer, title officer. That's why escrow and title, they're constant communication, but it can take a while, because imagine a child support lien and unraveling, or some kind of a judgment. Or,
do you remember mine?
Yeah. So something like that can take time and intense concentration and focus and follow up with the IRS, follow up with, all these courts.
Just for you guys to know, I had a murder bail bonds lien for a seller on a property. She posted bail for her friend's son who went to jail for murder. He served 20 years and it was attached to the property, and Ryan took care of it.
Yeah, we were able to remove that one, weren't we?
Yeah, you guys did.
I'm like, he's out of jail. It was paid.
Yeah, we basically proved like time served, but the bail bonds company had gone out of business, so we couldn't get them to release it.
That's another thing too, is vesting is really important. It just made me think of that, but you never know what you're going to see on a title report, right? That was one of the more off the wall, like anomalies, like straight up bail bond.
That was a fun one.
Title, I think if I'm an incoming buyer, I'm like, how do I hold title? What does vesting mean? What is joint tenants versus tenants in common? What is a percentage versus, do you want to go over some of the popular vestings, Haley, so I can know why hold in a trust versus an individual or married couple with joint tenants? What's survivorship, all that.
Yeah, of course. Well, fortunately, for lucky everyone in the state of California, if you are married and you go into a property, it's automatically 50%. So it's automatically community property. So if you guys are buying a property coming in as a married couple, you guys will have community property with rights of survivorship, meaning that if anything were to happen to the other spouse, it would automatically go to the surviving spouse. However, it's very important, I also think, that to educate your buyers to put your property in a trust if you are a couple, so it will state, how they hold their trust and that they're the trustees of their trust. That's really important, just because it makes your property not go to probate, which is, if anybody's had to deal with probate cases, it's not fun. Families start fighting. People think that they have more rights to a property than another sibling. So just to avoid any case like that, any extra hardship that would come after, an unfortunate death of a member on title, you just would want to avoid that. So holding a trust is overall the most highest kind of holding for your buyers coming in.
Playbook on what to do if you're not there to tell them what to do. That's what
I'm sorry, you cut out.
It's basically an instruction manual on what we do now that you're gone from the earth.
Right.
Trust, right.
Yeah, and then so if you're also and say you're just two people that you're not married, but you're buying a property together, you would go in as joint tenants. So it would be Nicole, an unmarried woman, and Alyssa, an unmarried woman, as joint tenants. So that means that they would have 50% survivorship of each of their own portion. So you would still have to do something with 50% of that. So if something were to happen, to Nicole, she still has 50%. So 50% of that asset could go potentially into probate. So that's very important to know.
So tenants in common is married couple. They collectively own 100% and it has rights of survivorship, just to clarify, correct?
Correct.
And joint
tenants
is you each have separate 50% ownership, and you can pass down your ownership separately. Correct.
So that's kind of, those two are some of the basic ones. Any other questions on that, Ryan? I can't really. And then if you're single, you hold it as, an unmarried person, as an individual. single in the property.
Perfect. That clarifies. I actually had that question this morning, so I'm going to tell her to watch this video.
Yay! And too, also feel free to have them call us if they want any further explanation as well. We have no problem going over those.
We're happy to.
Perfect. So when we do get the preliminary title report, I think the most questions that I get are on the exceptions. Do you want to explain what the exceptions are on a title report?
You want me to? Okay. So the exceptions are some the title companies do not cover. So they are exception to the policy. So that's why they do go onto your final title policy. So it will state the exceptions being, CC&Rs, the water rights on there, any kind of easements on there. So those are all exceptions that they've already been recorded through. So they carry on the property. So they are excluded from the title policy. So the title policy will really only cover anything else that would come up after that, any other liens or judgments that would come up. So that's why there are exclusions on the title policy, because we wouldn't be covering them because they've already been carried with the property.
So that's what a buyer should really be focused on, are those, would you guys
I would look at your CC&Rs. Those are pretty important to look at. Why we're talking about this funny thing with CC&Rs. I'm sure you guys might have came across this. There's a CC&R that went around like in the 40s, 50s, stating that you couldn't have certain religions on your property, certain races, you can't have alcohol on your property, kind of just off the wall crazy things that people in that kind of decade and age kind of had that lifestyle. And so your buyers will look at those and be like, what the hell? I can't have alcohol on my property. And obviously it is not enforced by the government, that you cannot enforce those, but there has legally been nothing recorded after that to remove it off the property. And they're not going to go back to the original person in the 40s to get something to sign off to remove it off the property.
So those are like no women allowed on golf courses and stuff like that. It's like, don't you know women run the world?
I want to shoot something up at you for that one.
My boyfriend wrote that one.
So that's interesting because those do come up in the CC&Rs, and it is not covered by the title policy, but obviously it's not enforceable because the government does not enforce.
On the exceptions too, it's like common sense stuff. Like if you strike oil on your house in Carlsbad, that's not your oil. You only get like so much of a depth. What is it, like 25 feet or something, Haley?
Don't hit me with that one.
So the Western regional exceptions are very, very the common sense stuff that just wouldn't apply to a title company having to cover like an act of nature or that type of stuff. So that's typically what the exceptions are. And then the other list is things that we're going to have to work through on the Schedule B, like the liens, the mortgages, the judgments, stuff like that. That we have to clear up.
Schedule B, the Schedule B gets items that are cleared up and removed.
Another one too is like, okay, so this couple bought a house after they were divorced for whatever reason, okay, and then so he deeded off, but he deeded with an uninsured deed. It's a big one. If you're gonna make a move on how you hold your home in terms of title, call one of us or call Alyssa or Nicole here and have them talk to us about it, because this lady would have avoided a world of hurt. Now she's got to go back to her ex-husband and have him sign an affidavit of uninsured, which says, I hereby acknowledge that I was giving up all my rights to this property, and they have to do it in retrospect. Well, they're not on good terms. It's going to be a street fight to get this thing signed, and he's probably going to want some money. She could have avoided all that by just getting an affidavit signed at that moment, or going back and getting an endorsement from the previously insuring company, which is like $150, $200. And then it would have been an insured deed. Uninsured deeds are huge ones. Let that be a buzzword for you guys to reach out to us whenever they want to change vesting.
And also too on that, it's important to know, a lot of people think like, oh, since an attorney drafted it for me, an attorney got it recorded for me, that it must be fine. But like in Ryan's statement, it's not. Typically an attorney probably would have drafted that and got it recorded, but it doesn't hold up for a title policy. It's uninsured deed. We don't know what the intentions were. We weren't there to ensure the deed, to make sure that that was the intention of the seller. There's so much that goes on with fraudulent deeds and fraudulent vestings and stuff like that. So it's really important. We have to ensure that and it's just for buyers coming in and your sellers. I mean, we have to ensure that there's going to be no lawsuits coming up down the road. So it's kind of for both people on both sides of the transaction.
Yeah.
So we've covered some really great points here on what's included in a prelim. Is there anything that you can, just to summarize here, that would make a buyer walk away from a property that they would see on a preliminary title report? Any big red flag that you would walk away from a home from? Or is that not something that happens on or in that title contingency period very often?
Not a lot. I mean, we've had things like view easements, like a downtown south-facing high-rise that has the ability for another high-rise to build right into their view. That has caused people to back out of deals. Or in La Jolla, there's a view easement, or a house is allowed or not allowed to build up or down based on easements like that. But a landlocked situation is overcomable. Like in Hamul or Alpine, you'll have a piece of land that is landlocked without access. That means no ingress or egress, no road flows to that land. So
I have one of those.
Land. People have pulled out of deals based on that because it's kind of a process. Because if I'm going for this lot and it's landlocked and there's a lot over there that isn't landlocked, I'm probably going to go over to that one if it's suitable.
Well, you also have to be aware, because this came up on a deal that we had together. We were the lot in front of the landlocked lot.
Yeah.
We had to alert the buyer that, hey, this lot behind you is landlocked, so they might have an implied easement over your property.
Right. So it's typical. It's not typically that the buyer sees something and says, to heck with this deal, it's not right. It's usually that something from the sellers, the skeletons in their closet, cannot be overcome. It usually kills the deal. Right. Yeah. Now, hopefully you work with some creative people. We overcome bail bonds and divorces and you name it. There's typically a solution, right? I mean, very rarely have we had to deny and deny insurance overall, and that's the final word. Usually you butt up against that and then you get creative and find a workaround, you know. And that's when and we underwrite in San Diego, which is nice. So I can go down the hall and talk to my underwriter instead of having to write an email or a letter and hope for the best.
And wait for a response. Also too, I wanted to ask, do you guys want to touch on like fees, how those are split up, how that title insurance is paid for throughout the transaction?
Yeah, that'd be
great.
great.
And maybe explain why we need a seller's policy and a lender's policy.
Yeah, of course. So that's kind of exactly why it's broken up in the policy. So when you you'll get two policies. So you'll see when you're getting a title report, there's going to be an Alta homeowner's policy and an Alta lender's policy. So the homeowner's policy is what the seller typically pays for in the transaction because it's covering the buyer's insurance coming in, that they're free and clear of all their judgments and liens. The lender's policy is typically covered by the buyer because they're insuring the lender in first position, that when they go to sell their home, they will pay off the lender first. So it's a lender's policy insuring the lender for the buyer. That's why the buyer typically pays for the lender policy, because it's their loan that they're getting. So they're insuring the lender, making sure they're in first position. So that's kind of how those fees are split up. And that's how, you know, you guys can always negotiate throughout your transaction on how you want to pay them and whatnot, but that is typically the standard split up on those.
Well, yeah, and I get the question, why two policies a lot? And the seller just says, Mr. Buyer, here's clean title. And the buyer has to say, Mr. Lender, here's clean title. So the lenders require their own policy.
Exactly.
Do you have any other questions, Nicole?
No, I think we covered a lot of great information. If anybody has any questions about title or prelim or anything we've discussed today, Ryan and Haley are the team to help. That includes agents too. Any agents watching this, if you'd like the Lipsey team's contact information, just shoot us a message. They are a wealth of information and have been a huge help for both Alyssa and I and for plenty of other agents out there. So definitely use them, call us, call them.
I'm going to give one more plug too, is Ryan has been really great in helping us find off-market properties for buyers. It is slim inventory out there right now. So his team has been doing targeted searches for my buyers, and we're sending mailers out to all the homes that match their criteria to find them an off-market property. So if you're a buyer and you've had a hard time looking for a house, reach out to us. We'll all team up and help you.
Yep.
Awesome.
Thank you. It's a great show you guys have got going here.
I love it. I love the blondes doing real estate, breaking it
We're
down.
breaking it down.
Breaking it down.
Yeah, I almost got my hair colored for it.
We were hoping.
It gives us a reason for a sequel, right?
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. We really appreciate your time, and we'll have you back soon.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Bye.